Recentemente tivemos revelações bombásticas de que o governo dos Estados Unidos tem projetos secretos para reengenharia de objetos voadores não identificados e entidades biológicas não humanas. Mas que projetos secretos são esses? E mais, a exobiologia tem algo a ver com isso? Será que existem humanos e extraterrestres convivendo juntos em um acordo de cooperação técnica, tecnológica ou até mesmo mortal? Vem comigo que nessa entrevista inédita e exclusiva, o nosso convidado vai falar sobre isso e muito mais. Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, boa madrugada, aonde você estiver. Eu sou Thiago Luiz Tiquete. Sejam bem-vindos ao canal Desvendando Mistérios. O nosso convidado de hoje é o pesquisador norte-americano Michael Salla, que, entre outros assuntos, vai falar sobre exopolítica. Essa política entre o que está na Terra e o que vem de fora. Michael já escreveu vários livros, muitos controversos, onde ele afirma que governos terrestres têm acordos com raças inteligentes alienígenas. Afirma que presidentes norte-americanos sabiam desses acordos, chegaram a confeccioná-lo, criá-lo e também encontraram-se com seres de outros planetas. Numa semana onde tivemos revelações bombásticas de um ex-agente da inteligência e ex-militar norte-americano que afirmou sob juramento que o governo americano tem sim projetos secretos, o que Michael Salla vinha dizendo há muitos anos pode não ser uma total desvaneio de sua cabeça. Pode ser real. E se for real, estaremos preparados? Vem comigo em mais uma entrevista inédita e exclusiva que você só encontra aqui no canal Desvendando Mistérios. E aquele lembrete, não se esqueça de se inscrever no canal se você não é inscrito. E se já é, não deixe de marcar o sininho, porque sempre que tiver um vídeo novo, uma estreia, você vai ser avisado. Também curta todos os mais de 400 vídeos do canal feitos para você que gosta de ufologia. E também deixe o seu comentário, eu quero saber o que você pensa de cada vídeo que nós postamos aqui. E por fim, mas não menos importante, compartilhe o canal. Vamos chegar aos 20 mil inscritos até o final desse ano. Dr. Michael Salla, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for being in my YouTube channel. Thank you very much, sir.
It's my pleasure, Thiago.
Well, I will start with the same questions to all my guests. What led you to UFO research?
Well, in 2001, I was teaching international politics at American University in Washington, D.C., and I got very interested in the UFO disclosure press conference that was hosted by Dr. Stephen Greer at the National Press Club. And when I watched that, I knew that there was a lot of truth to this UFO cover-up and the possibility that extraterrestrial life was visiting us. So in 2001, I thought that that was very important for what I was teaching at the university, and I began to study it. And the more I studied it, the more real it became. And that's how my exopolitics career really began.
And we have the exopolitics.org is your website or your organization. Tell us what is this exopolitics.org come about and what is it?
Well, it is really looking at the political implications of extraterrestrial life. So in politics, you have things like international politics, political economy, regional politics. And so I thought, well, what happens when we're talking about extraterrestrial life? You know, what are we going to call that? And so exopolitics was the name that occurred to me as probably the most sensible. And so I began to use that in 2003.
And what's the best? We here in my YouTube channel, we deal with the people with a lot of knowledge and the people with less knowledge. So, what is the best concept for the word exopolitics to be adopted by the public?
Well, I think when we think of a new field of knowledge, when it comes to extraterrestrial life, we think like exobiology, which is looking at biology from the perspective of extraterrestrial life. Or we look at exoplanetology, which is looking at planets outside of our solar system. So exopolitics is similar because you're looking at politics from the perspective of extraterrestrial life.
And what's the importance of the exopolitics? Because, well, let's say um, tomorrow we discover or the cover up, the disclosure happen, and they tell us that we have been visited by alien extraterrestrials and alien beings. Uh, what's important of the exopolitics and how the world, I mean, law, I mean, medicine, history, what's going to change after that?
Well, there's a lot that has already changed. It's just that people don't appreciate it and don't understand it. Because people think, well, when we discover extraterrestrial life or when the existence of extraterrestrial life begins, that's when exopolitics begins officially. But in truth, exopolitics has been happening for over 70 years now, going all the way back to the 1940s when you had the first examples of UFO crashes in Roswell, New Mexico, and elsewhere around the world. And even during the Second World War, or before the Second World War in 1933, you actually had a flying saucer crash in Italy. So, going all the way back to the 1930s, there are examples of extraterrestrial spacecraft crashing on the Earth. And when government officials decide, well, we're going to keep this covered up, we're not going to tell the people, that's an exopolitical policy. So exopolitics began from the time when you had the first evidence of flying saucers and extraterrestrial life visiting our planet, and public policy officials, politicians, military leaders made the decision that they weren't going to tell the people. That's exopolitics. So it's been happening for a long time. And it covers not just the political field, but also covers the legal field. For example, what rights do extraterrestrials have if they land on Earth? Do they have any rights? Or is there some sort of galactic law that applies? What happens economically when we find out that extraterrestrials are able to travel from other solar systems to our solar system and our world using advanced energy devices that would make fossil fuel production redundant? So all of these questions all come from the visitation of extraterrestrial life. And so that's why I always thought it was very important for us to start looking at these exopolitical questions.
And in your opinion, when we have this disclosure and confirmation that we have been visited by aliens, do you think that our lives, mundane life, or people like us, our life is gonna be better? It's gonna be the same, or gonna be worst?
I think for many of us who have been working in this field, things will improve because we've developed a body of knowledge. We've written books, put out films, documentaries. We have invested a lot of time and energy into understanding this phenomenon. And when you actually have official disclosure, people will start to look at, well, who are the authoritative sources? Who are the people who can talk about this topic with credibility and have a lot of legitimacy? And so they're going to start looking at those that have already done years of work and have put out a lot of material. So I think for many of us who have been working in this field for many years or decades, it will be a very positive experience because a lot of people will suddenly take our body of work seriously. But in the long term, in 5 to 10 years' time, there'll be big changes because in 5 to 10 years' time, people won't remember the cover up. They'll be just focused on what's new, what's the latest technology, what is happening in deep space, what galactic conflicts exist out there. They'll be interested in those questions. So I think for the next 5 to 10 years, as disclosure happens, is going to be like a golden age for us UFO researchers or exopolitics researchers. And then after that, things will change.
Well, because of your work, your research, have you ever been threatened by some kind of men in black or some kind of agents or some kind of something?
I've never been directly threatened. I think the way I was treated at the university when I was working is probably an example of how the system works, where if you have a position of authority where the public or the mass media is interested in your views because of your position. So I was like a assistant professor at a public university that had a good reputation. So I was often interviewed by radio stations and television stations about international politics. Well, when I got interested in this field, I became a threat. And so the university very quickly made it clear that they didn't want me to talk about this. Now, I don't think that was accidental. I think in a way, maybe that was an example of how the system works, where if you have a position, you're a threat, but if your position is removed, and I was eventually released from the university, sacked from the university, if you like, and so then I wasn't a threat. And so that's, I think, the way the system worked for me.
But in 2017, the Revista UFO magazine held the first seminar on preparation for extraterrestrial contact and exopolitics for the creation of the Brazilian Institute of Exopolitics, the IBEXO. You were expected to be the main speaker, but you were not able to attend. What happened?
Yes, that was a very unfortunate situation. I flew into Sao Paulo from the United States, and I was told that my visa had expired. And I was very surprised because I believed that it was valid for 5 years. But apparently, I was told that it had expired after only a few months, which was very unusual because normally international visitors are given 5-year visas. And so that's what I assumed had happened in my case. And so the customs officials insisted that my visa had expired. They weren't willing to accommodate me in any way. And so they wouldn't let me into the country. So I had to leave. And I think that there was something happening there that I felt that this was not something that should have happened.
Do you think that it was premeditated?
I felt like that, yes, because I remember when I arrived there, there was like people checked the computers and they just said to me, no, we're not going to let you in. And even though I protested and explained why I was there and that I was only there to attend a conference, they wouldn't relent, and they just it sounded like there was something that was very premeditated. Yes.
Well, this is embarrassing. But let's change the subject. Some of the most popular US presidents have their names directly associated with UFOs and extraterrestrials. In your opinion, which president or presidents is or are the most important among them, and why?
Well, there have been a number of American presidents that have spoken about UFOs and extraterrestrial life. I think there are a number of presidents that I could discuss, but I think the one who was probably the most vocal was President Reagan. From 1981 to 1989, he was president, and on multiple occasions, he actually talked about extraterrestrial life. He actually said that how positive it would be for the planet if all our differences were overcome by a common threat, and that was the extraterrestrial presence. So Ronald Reagan, I think, received a briefing, a partial briefing, that extraterrestrials were here, but they were a threat. I think he was misled about that, but nevertheless, he was the only American president who has actually come out and talked about extraterrestrial life as actually visiting our planet. Other presidents have speculated or talked about what if UFOs are real, or discussed that possibility, but Reagan was the only one that actually went on the record and publicly said that extraterrestrial life is something that is visiting us or could be visiting us, and that humanity needs to unite against this alien threat.
Well, in my opinion, Ronald Reagan was the last president to have more access to this subject. I'm not talking about Bush, the father, Bush the first, because he was a CIA or FBI director for many years. But in my opinion, I think Reagan was the last one to have access to that. Is that correct?
Yeah, Ronald Reagan definitely received a briefing about extraterrestrial life. I think he was told about extraterrestrials and told about secret space programs. There's a very famous quote in his memoirs where in 1985 he said that he had lunch with 5 top scientists from NASA, and that they told him that we could place 300 people in orbit at that time. And that was, at the time, the space shuttle had just started to operate. And at most, if you sent up all the space shuttles, and I think there were 5 that were operational, you could have like maybe 50 to 60 people in space if all of them went up at the same time. So Reagan was talking about 300 that could be put in space and put in orbit. So he was talking about the secret space program. So I think Reagan was given briefings about not just extraterrestrial life, but also about the secret space program that has been developed behind the scenes by the different branches of the US military.
Now let's get in a field very dark, very controversial. In your book, this book, Kennedy Last Stand, you bring up what would be the President Kennedy's attempt to end the UFO cover-up. Did he die because of it?
Yes, I'm convinced that President Kennedy died because he wanted to share access to UFOs and to extraterrestrial life. And the thing that I think got him killed was the fact that he wanted to have the access spread amongst the different branches of the US bureaucracy. It wasn't as though President Kennedy wanted to release all this to the public. That's not correct. What he wanted to do was to have access to the UFOs taken from the hands of the CIA and made available to different government agencies. And he wanted to share that with the Soviet Union because he wanted to develop positive relations with the Soviet Union, develop joint missions to the moon and space exploration. And he realized that one way to develop positive relations with the Soviet Union was to share all of the classified information concerning UFOs and extraterrestrial life. And that's what got him killed, because on November 12 of 1963, this is when it was clear that the Soviet Union had agreed to cooperate with Kennedy, not just on joint space and moon missions, but also on sharing classified UFO files. And the people that ran the UFO projects wouldn't allow that. And so that's why they went ahead with the assassination.
And in this book, you talk about the Eisenhower and MJ-12. Is it true that Eisenhower met aliens on Holloman, Air Force AFB Holloman, and MJ-12 existed, and that and those documents are true, or some are true, some are false?
Right. Well, when we're talking about MJ-12, we have to understand that this was a committee set up by President Truman in 1947 in September, and they were given full authority over the UFO cover-up and to deal with the question of extraterrestrial life. So this was something that they began to do from 1947. So they got a lot of power. And what we do know about MJ-12, a lot of that information comes from these leaked documents called Majestic documents. And these documents have been analysed by US investigators in terms of their genuineness, and they have matched the documents, done forensic analyses, done historical research to prove whether or not the Majestic documents are genuine. And so the end result of very detailed investigations into the authenticity of these Majestic documents was that at least some of them, if not many of them, are accurate, and that they describe a cover-up. And probably the document that's the most famous and also one of the most controversial is the Eisenhower briefing document, when President Eisenhower was given a short briefing about the history of UFOs and extraterrestrial crashes, and this is what he was told, and that document was included in these Majestic documents that were leaked to the public. And when that document was analysed by some famous US researchers such as Stanton Friedman, they found it to be credible.
Stanton Friedman was one of the greatest defender of the MJ-12 documents. Well, I have a very curiosity, because why do many US presidential candidates say in their campaigns that they are going to, disclosure all the UFO secrets, but when they reach the White House, it never happened? Why? They don't have the key to the safe. They don't have this password. Why? Someone get in to their ears and say, well, you cannot talk about it. Why?
Well, many American presidents, when they win the election, they assume that they are the most powerful man in the United States. And so when they enter the White House on the very first day, they are met by a group of officials that tell them that in fact that the president doesn't have security clearance on many projects and that he doesn't have the power to know about these or disclose any information about them. And so the question of UFOs and extraterrestrial life, even though that might be something that they have spoken about during the campaign, when they enter office, they are told that they don't have security clearance for that they don't have need to know. And so this is very embarrassing for an American president to say that, well, I don't have need to know. Terribly embarrassing. So they just go quiet because they don't have the power to shift the military industrial complex to do their will. So that the presidents learn very, very quickly that they don't have as much power as they thought.
It's like kind of the fourth power, isn't it? Like the X-Files, that little group that knows everything. They control the world. They control the alien debris, the alien contact. They know everything, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's like a secret government, and there have been a number of presidents that have talked about the power of that secret government. Bill Clinton had told a journalist that even though he was very interested in the UFO issue, he said that there's a secret government that would not allow him to have access. So this is one of those examples of where you have a president acknowledging that he does not have the power, that there's a more powerful organization that will not allow him to have access to the files or to speak about the UFO issue.
And you also have this book. I have it in Spanish. Exposición de las políticas del gobierno de United States sobre la vida extraterrestre. What's talking about this book? It's about documents, about some facts, because we are telling much of we know in ufology is theory. Do you have some concrete about the U.S. government that, well, they are hiding secrets, they have a secret alliances with alien beings?
Yes, what we know about these secret projects concerning extraterrestrial life really comes from a number of sources. We have whistleblowers. We have people who have worked in top secret projects for the military or for corporations that have come forward and talked about it. We have the majestic documents or the leaked documents that talk about these things. We have UFO reports, many hundreds, thousands, many thousands of UFO reports, especially concerning military facilities or nuclear weapons, where you have UFOs deactivating the nuclear weapons at a military base. And so that is something that is a very real process that has been documented by officials who have shared what has happened. And so when you add all this together, it makes for a compelling case. The problem always is people say, well, where's the hard evidence? Where's the proof? Well, if you have the proof, then you'll be visited by men in black who'll just take it from you. And if you don't give it to them, then you disappear. So, people say, well, how come the proof is never there? It's because, well, if it was there, then it was taken away. So it's a very challenging field. It's a conundrum, but we do our best to reveal the truth, and that means working with the sources that we know. And as I mentioned, we've got whistleblowers, we've got leaked documents, we've got UFO sightings, we've got Freedom of Information Act documents that all build the big picture of what's happening.
And but do you believe that the U.S. government agencies have secretly implemented public policy for decades, to dismiss the UFO phenomena or discredit the people who come abroad to tell their experience?
Yes, that has been happening, and we know actually that that's a fact, because in 1952 and 1953 there was a panel that was created by the CIA called the Robertson Panel, and they delivered a report, and the report is called the Durant Report. So you can find this report online. It was given in January 1953, and in the report it says that the flying saucer issue is something that needs to be debunked, and that they would use the media and the entertainment industry to ridicule anyone talking about flying saucers as a real phenomenon. So we actually have an official document acknowledging that flying saucers are something that government policy is designed to discredit and debunk, because it was argued at the time that the flying saucer phenomenon can be manipulated by foreign enemies and to undermine the United States. So they made it a matter of national policy to debunk and discredit anyone talking about flying saucers or extraterrestrial spacecraft visiting our Earth. So this was a very effective strategy, because it meant that any scientist, any academic, any politician, anyone of influence, if they began to talk about this phenomenon being real, they would be ridiculed as someone that was naive and gullible. So this was the policy ever since 1953, and it continues to today.
And you have written 2 books on secret space programs. One of this book is this one, Insiders Reveal Secret Space Programs and Extraterrestrial Aliens. I will leave all the links to buy your books and your website in the description of the video, so the audience will buy it. We will have the chance to buy it. And what you can tell us about these secret programs and alliances with the extraterrestrial? Is it real? Do we have alliances with the extraterrestrial beings?
Yes, I believe that there has been alliances with extraterrestrial beings, because one of the things that is very important to understand was that back in 1947, US technology was very primitive compared to today. Today we have fiber optics, we have silicon chips, we have micro processing computers, supercomputers, we even have AI. All of these things in the 1940s were decades away. And so when the first flying saucer craft were captured, when the American scientists of the day looked at them, they didn't understand. They saw the fiber optic cables. They didn't understand what these were. They saw the microprocessors, the silicon chips making up the craft's operating navigation system. They didn't understand how that worked. They looked at the propulsion system in terms of using torsion fields or anti-gravity effects. They didn't understand these things. So that for them, for the American government, it was a priority from the 1940s when this was discovered to find out whether they could make agreements with anyone who knew about these technologies. And so extraterrestrials, because they were the ones that had developed these technologies, it was desired for the governments to find the extraterrestrials, communicate with them, and reach agreements with them in order to reverse engineer these advanced flying saucer technologies that came into the possession of the American government in 1947. So we're talking about things that happened over 70 years ago. And so if you think about it logically, well, 70 years ago, American aviation industry didn't have things like computer processing or fiber optics or like nuclear propulsion systems, but now they do. So how much of that was due to cooperation with our extraterrestrials? And I think when we look at it historically, we'll find that, and there have been people that have come forward to talk about how extraterrestrials have helped the reverse engineering of some of the spacecraft that had crashed in the United States or had been recovered from anywhere else in the world and brought to the United States. That these have been reverse engineered, and that the US Air Force and the US Navy both developed separate secret space programs based on the aerospace technologies that they were able to reverse engineer.
That's great. In this book as well, you talk about the real flying saucers and the so-called Black Fleet or Dark Fleet. What is it?
Well, we do know that Nazi Germany during the Second World War was building flying saucers. There have been a lot of very credible reports describing the testing of the flying saucers. And so some of these reports are official reports that describe these. Now, what we have also are whistleblowers who have come forward saying that the Nazis had developed functional flying saucers and that they had begun to move these to South America and Antarctica during the Second World War. And that immediately after the Second World War, there was an attempt by the US Navy through Operation High Jump to find the German base in Antarctica that they had built and that they had developed all of these flying saucer technologies. And that when that base was found by the US and the British, because the British were involved as well, the British had an operation in 1946, 1 year before Operation High Jump. And in 1947, Operation High Jump arrives in Antarctica, and there was a battle, and they lost to the German flying saucer fleet, which was called the Dark Fleet or the Nachtwaffen. And to this day, that has been a very powerful third force, if you like, in world politics.
Wow, it's amazing. It's amazing. And it's too many information to digest. And well, what are the types of the aliens that have these aliens with the human with the U.S. government? They were Nordic, they were Greys, because I remember back to the 80s, to the 90s, the William Cooper report that had a battle in underground secret base. So what the type of the aliens that is helping us or exchange information, and the William Cooper, that story is true.
Yes, there are different groups of extraterrestrials that are visiting us. I mean, there are estimates of as much as 60 different extraterrestrial groups visiting us from different planetary systems. And that these groups really divide up into kind of three main factions. One is a positive human faction, the Nordics, or some call it the Galactic Federation or the Galactic Confederation. Another faction is the grey aliens, and that is called the Orion faction because they come from largely from the Orion star system. And a third faction is the Draconian faction. These are reptilian entities, and they come largely from the Alpha Draconis star system and other places. So three main factions, and out of those three main factions, you have like as many as 60 different groups, extraterrestrial groups, that belong to one of these factions. And so this has been the history of our planet for a long, long time. But from the 1940s, these different factions came and wanted to work with the US government, wanted to work with the Soviet government, with the French government, the Japanese, and so forth. And agreements were reached in the 1950s with the Orion Greys and with the reptilians, but not with the Galactic Federation. But there was a secret relationship or cooperation between the US Navy and the Nordics or the Galactic Federation. So it's very complex because in the United States you have, now you have 6 military services, and each of those services are all autonomous, and they set up their own policies. But when it comes to the extraterrestrial question, the two main military services are the US Navy and the US Air Force. And these have their own histories and their own black programs, and they reach their own agreements with these different extraterrestrial factions. And then you have another group, which is the intelligence community in the United States, which is the CIA and the National Reconnaissance Office. And they also have agreements with some of these factions. So in the US, there are many different secret space programs that are controlled and owned by different military services or intelligence agencies.
And I have a lot of other books. This book here, Antarctica's Hidden History, is about the secret space programs. Was there a secret agreement between the US government and the German separatists for a space program?
There definitely was. My research has shown that there was agreements between the Germans in Antarctica and the US military, the Eisenhower administration in particular. And we see this because of Operation Paperclip, which brought in thousands of Nazi scientists, and they were promoted to very senior positions in the US aerospace industry. And so some of these Nazi scientists actually began to be seen with prominent Nazi officials such as Hans Kammler, who had escaped the Second World War to South America and had gone down to Antarctica. So some of these officials from Operation Paperclip were seen with Hans Kammler. And the former Nazi scientists that were part of Operation Paperclip they actually ran NASA, or ran the Apollo program to be more exact. So you had in the 1960s and into the 1970s, the Apollo program, which got Americans to the moon, actually was run by Germans. And that's a fact. Anyone can see this if you look at the history, because the groups that ran the Marshall Space Flight Center, which was in control of the Apollo program, this was run by Werner von Braun and other Nazis that worked under him at Marshall Space Flight Center. And then you had the Kennedy Space Center, which was where the Apollo rockets were launched from, and that was run by another Nazi. And that was run by Dr. Kurt Debus, who was a very prominent Nazi SS official as well. So the Apollo program was run by former Nazis who had been brought into the United States under Operation Paperclip, because this was part of the agreement that was reached with the Germans in Antarctica. That the Germans in Antarctica said, well, we want American resources and we want your military to work with us, give us advanced technologies, weapons, and personnel, and we'll give you in exchange, we'll give you information that you need to reverse engineer these advanced technologies. So we'll be partners. And so that's what happened. And the Apollo program was a cover for this cooperation between the Antarctic Germans and the US military-industrial complex.
And you recently posted an article in your website about a US Army soldier that blows whistle on a secret missions to Ganymede and to the moon. Can you tell us more about this?
Yes, this is a source that I know from 2008 when he was in Brazil and he had a contact experience in Brazil. So when he came back to the United States, he began communicating with me and I began working with him. In early 2020, he joined the US Army because he had been encouraged to join the Army by covert operatives with Air Force Special Operations that wanted him to join because they knew he had contact with extraterrestrials and they needed help with understanding some ancient extraterrestrial technologies that were being found around our solar system. And so they didn't understand it. And so they wanted him to be involved, but to do that, they wanted to encourage him to join the military. So eventually, after many years of saying no, he eventually did join. And so they've been sending him up on different missions. And the latest mission is to Ganymede, where he went to Ganymede and he was doing all sorts of jobs there for the Secret Space Program or for US Space Command. And this is something that is very unique because there have been very few serving members of the military, the US military, that have talked about their direct involvement in classified extraterrestrial programs. Usually when that happens, they lose their careers or they are punished in some way. But I believe my source, JP, has been allowed to come forward and talk about this because this is the time for disclosure to happen.
Bob Lazar is a fraud. He's telling the truth. The U.S. government erased his past life. What do you think about Bob Lazar?
Well, I believe that Bob Lazar was telling the truth. George Knapp, who is the investigative journalist who first brought the Bob Lazar case to the American public and to the world, he's done a lot of important research on Bob Lazar. and showed that government authorities were covering up the fact that Bob Lazar did work at Los Alamos National Laboratories and that he had a scientific background. So Bob Lazar, I think, is someone that whose identity and whose background was covered up by those that run these projects, because he was asked to go and work at the Area 51 facility called S4. And when he was there, he did have access to one of the flying saucer craft, and his job was to understand the propulsion system for that, which makes sense because he was a young man, or he was a scientist at the time, who was very interested in exotic propulsion systems. And so he was thinking outside of the box, very creative thinker. And this is what the military intelligence community are always looking for. They're looking for people who have abilities that maybe will help them understand how these advanced extraterrestrial technologies work. So to my mind, Bob Lazar was one of these people that was recognized by the military intelligence community to have these out-of-the-box thinking and abilities that could maybe bring about a breakthrough in understanding how to reverse engineer the propulsion system of one of these flying saucer craft. And I think that ever since that time, Bob Lazar has been very consistent with his story. He's never wavered, and more investigators have looked at it and just become convinced that he's telling the truth, and I agree with them.
That's great. To finish our interview, Dr. Michael Salla, do you believe that there will be a full UFO disclosure, and when this is going to happen?
I think that within the next 2 to 3 years, our planet is going to change incredibly. And I think what will happen after that is that we'll have full disclosure. We're going to have the truth emerging about advanced technologies that have been suppressed for over a century. I mean, if you look in the United States, the US Patents and Trademarks Office has over 5,800 patents that have been withheld under national security orders. This means that these patents deal with advanced technologies that have not been allowed to come into the public sector because they threaten national security. 5,800. And all of these have been blocked because there have been very powerful groups that did not want those technologies to be released. So what's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years is that those technologies are going to be released, and the existence of secret space programs and extraterrestrial life is going to be revealed soon after. And once all of those technologies are released, we are going to go through a very, very rapid technological revolution, because the single biggest thing that holds back human ingenuity, human creativity and abundance and progress is energy, because we are still dependent on fossil fuel. We are dependent on the same fossil fuels that were discovered over 100 years ago, and that are still used today for cars, for aircraft, and for ocean-going ships, and even for spacecraft, for the rockets. The same oil-dependent propulsion systems. So we are going to witness that being replaced very, very quickly by these new energy technologies that are going to come on, whether it's cold fusion, whether it's zero-point energy, whether it's some kind of piezoelectric effect, many different ways in which alternative energy can be generated to power humanity's needs for becoming interstellar explorers. And so we are going to have an incredible revolution in the next, starting, I think, in 2 to 3 years, when all of these technologies are released. And what's going to happen to release that? Well, I think right now we are witnessing the whole world being locked down because of all of the policies to deal with the virus and so forth. But that'll come to an end. And when that ends, I think what you'll see is this tremendous growth, because humanity is resisting the deep state, which is trying to lock us down to stop our growth. And humanity is resisting that. And when we win, and it'll probably take, sometime in the next 2 years, maybe 3 years maximum, but I think within the next 2 to 3 years, humanity will win. The deep state that are forcing the lockdowns, that are manipulating populations all over the world, they will be exposed and removed. And then all of these advanced technologies that have been suppressed for well over a century, since the time of Nikola Tesla, will be released, and we will then undergo a really rapid technological evolution. And then you'll have soon after that the release of the truth about secret space programs, and then eventually the truth about extraterrestrial life.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much, Dr. Michael Salla, for your time. And the Brazilian audience is going to love it, because we have the great curiosity about these subjects, and all your books can be bought, can buy by Amazon.com.br. So I will leave all the links below in the description of this video. Once again, Doctor, thank you very much for your time.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Thiago.
Foi isso então, pessoal. Espero que vocês tenham gostado dessa entrevista com o Dr. Michael Salla. Muita controvérsia, muito assunto interessante, alguns segredos. Então, se você gostou, curta, comente, compartilhe e se inscreva no canal.